This is the good stuff. Time to go from messy wood under tarp out in the rain to nice, stacked neatly, dry, up on pallets off the ground, cordwood. 4 years ago, we cleared the trees from our building site, and William piled them all up in what's called a log deck in the logging industry. And now we are using it for firewood. So step one is William moving the logs and then cutting them into rounds. And these rounds were placed in this big pile right here, ready for the splitter, which is what I'm doing today. Step one is to take all the rounds that require splitting and putting them kind of in my staging area for the splitter. And then everything that's already in a diameter that our wood stove will accept, I'm kind of pitching over here into this pile. Then I'm gonna take the pickup, back it over here, throw everything in it, and put it into our nice, shiny new woodshed. So this is where a little bit of strategy comes into play when you're moving your firewood from point A to point B, which is the pickup, because ultimately it's going to wind up at point C. Now, in my wood stacking endeavors today, I'm starting a new row, and I prefer to have the bottom of my row with split wood because it sits more stably on the surface, the pallets, that I'm putting it on. Now, it's going to come out of the back of the pickup in reverse, which means that I want to make sure that I put split wood on top. So what I'm going to do actually is prioritize, at least mostly, the round wood that didn't get split because it's already small enough to fit in our stove. And if you ever did shot put in high school, it'll serve you in good stead here. Or you could just do it underhand like that. The key, of course, is not to hit the back window of the pickup because then the owner of the pickup gets crabby, rightfully so. So here we are with enough split rounds to put a nice even layer all across the bottom, and then I can put my round rounds on top, and that'll hold in and lock in very nicely. Stacking firewood is a little bit like playing Tetris. You want to maximize your space. And so as I'm coming along here, I'm making sure that my bottom rung of firewood is placed perpendicular all the way across so I don't wind up with kind of wonky angles, because if you wind up with wonky angles, it gets more and more difficult to make a nice, clean, neat, tidy stack as you go up. Another thing that's kind of useful to keep in mind is that if you put longer pieces on the bottom, then they won't stick out in the middle of your pile going up. So some kind of nuances to keep track of as you're stacking firewood. Here's an example of how you can see that I had two pretty long pieces here. So I put those on my bottom layer, and they're butted totally up against the previous tier. But I'm not doing that all the way across. In fact, what I'm more likely to do is put my shorter pieces more aligned with the front of these long pieces, and that creates a gap between these two. It can be really tempting as you go up to close that gap, but you want to strive to keep things flush with the front. As you work your way up, that gap will close. And that's okay, but if you close the gap between this tier and the one behind it too much, that's where you run into trouble, because by the time you get to the top, you really don't have room to put these full-length pieces in safely, because they will kick out. The other thing that it allows you to do is if you have kind of funky pieces that have something like this one's going on with a knot in the back, you can use that space to hide that knot, and then you can still keep a pretty perpendicular line going all the way across. It can work both ways. So in this case, this side is toward the front, and I've just placed this short piece behind it. And then there are the pieces like this, and there's just no salvaging that in terms of stacking. So I like to save those and put them in a space on top where they'll stay out of the way and they won't mess up anything going in on top of them. I do want to talk a little bit about the sides here. This is the uphill side. And on the uphill side, I don't really have anything in place yet. I am going to side this, but I don't have anything in place to really hold that up. But it's okay because gravity works. So if I do this right, the pressure will continue to go downhill. Really what you're trying to do is kind of lock things in as much as possible. What I have here, I might actually take another run at, because you can see I've got two round pieces. I actually have three round pieces right there. Round pieces roll, and I don't want them to roll out. So I probably will restack that with some cut or split pieces to create a more stable side. On my downhill side, I have this really weathered, we'll call it, pallet that is placed there to create a barrier for this side to push against. So it's not as important over here. And I did that specifically on the downhill side because I knew that most of the weight was going to be pushing downhill. This one I'm going to keep here because this one is locked in pretty well by virtue of the fact that it's got this kind of dangly angle. And that angle is coming in on this side of the piece below it. And so once something's on top of it, it's going to have a really hard time rolling. As much as you can, you want to place these so that they're level going across the top for the next layer. But where you can't pull that off, it's best to have the uphill side pointed out, because that puts the pressure of the road that'll go on top of it leaning back. And that's a lot more stable and safe. You want to create triangles of space as much as you can. They don't have to be perfect triangles. Of course, it's ideal if you can pull that off. But you're creating this kind of V shape because another split piece will fit in there really nicely and offer a flat-ish platform on top for your next layer. So here we are, all stacked up, and you can see that because I closed the gap toward the top, it's actually leaning more backwards than forwards. But it's pretty straight up and down, and I'm really confident it's not going to fall over. On to the next.